Welcome to another episode of Touring the AFC South. I am your host, Mike Patton, and on this episode, we're going to dive into a few things with all the AFC South teams. And of course, we have another mailbag to empty on this episode. So stay tuned in. We're going to get through everything, talk about a few things with all these different teams and a few other, interesting things as well. Of course, the first interesting thing we want to talk about in this show is the new uniforms and logos for the Tennessee Titans. Of course, one day they put out a symbol said, hey, 312 2026, and it had, basically stars on a cloth part of a uniform. We didn't know what it was, but we eventually saw what it was. And here I'm going to show you what these uniforms look like. If you're watching these uniforms, they're on the screen right now. Of course, you see one that's white jersey, blue pants. One's blue jersey, white pants, and the other is all white. You notice it's not a dark two-tone blue helmet. It actually is a white helmet. It has a stripe down the middle, unlike the old white Titan helmets. And also, of course, the logo has changed. It is a circular logo with a T with 3 stars in it. 3 stars are actually very, very key to the state of Tennessee in terms of different things. Here it represents the west, the middle, and the east part of Tennessee. So definitely like the uniforms. Definitely a new twist on the uniforms. I know some people are mentioning, of course, the uniforms and how they particularly look like a particular uniform that this franchise had when they were in Houston and were known as the Houston Oilers. Now, that has been a talk that has happened. It's happened ever since uniforms have dropped. Now, am I crazy enough to say they aren't a little Oiler-esque? No, I'm not crazy enough to say that, but they aren't exactly basically a replica of those uniforms. It's kind of tying the new version of the Tennessee Titans in terms of the new era, I should say, with the different logos, the basically, you look at the stripe down the middle, it kind of looks like guitar strings as well. If you pay attention to that, there's a lot of different things going on with this uniform that a lot of people are not really looking into and seeing the differences and the intricacies that are different than the Houston Oilers uniforms. Also, there's stars on the uniforms, things like that too. 3 stars for, of course, the state of Tennessee. So not necessarily the same uniforms, but I'll break it down to, just to kind of talk about it a little bit more. One thing about Texas fans are not too happy because, of course, Houston Oilers, they were there, the colors and all those different things. Well, actually, it's Titan blue. It's actually not the same blue as the Tennessee Oilers. So that's actually a difference in the uniform that nobody's really talking about or anything of that nature. So the blue isn't exactly the same as the Oilers blue. Also, another thing that no one really mentions is that when the Houston Texans were coming about, they didn't really want to replicate any of the colors of the Houston Oilers. I remember John McClain put out a couple texts on Twitter, or a couple tweets, on Twitter, talking about the owner of the Texans, and when he was bringing this team or getting ready to be, have this team be back in the NFL, he did not really want the colors or anything of that nature of the team. He, I guess Mr. McClain asked him a couple times about it. He did not want the colors at all. So in that aspect, Houston could have had those same colors. However, wanted a new franchise. The owner of the Texans wanted a new franchise, or kind of a rebirth of a franchise there, a birth of a new franchise there in Houston, as opposed to bringing the old colors and bringing kind of that nostalgia back. Secondly, we'll say that, or thirdly, I'll say, because I did talk about the uniform difference in terms of the color and, of course, not wanting the uniform. But thirdly, I'll say this. In any business, you don't give away something that's a property. A lot of times, especially if it's one that makes you money, And essentially, the Titans own the Houston Oilers in terms of colors, uniforms, any of those things that they ever want to wear a throwback uniform, they own those. So the notion that they should give them back to Houston, that's not necessarily how business works. So, and then plus these uniforms aren't the Houston Oilers uniforms. I'm not saying they didn't take pieces or, it doesn't look like they took pieces or anything of that nature. All I'm saying is that it's a different uniform. And, eventually at some point, got to move on from the uniforms, got to move on from the color. And I know it's not necessarily an easy thing for anyone that is a old Houston Oilers fan, but eventually you have to move on. It's been roughly, it'll be 30 years almost that they have been gone from Houston. And it's coming up on 30 years. So eventually at some point, gotta move forward, gotta talk about something else, or gotta come up with a different thing. But it is what it is. And the Hatfields and McCoys, that's what I like to call the Texans and the Titans. So it'll be interesting to see what the battle is and what happens and all those different things. And just to see their reception when the Titans roll into Houston wearing their brand new uniforms, logos, and everything. It'll be very interesting to see. All right. Up next on the docket, of course, we got to talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars. Of course, we talked about the loss of HN to the New Orleans Saints and Devin Lloyd to the Carolina Panthers, but they did have a new addition in their backfield. His name is Chris Rodriguez Jr. Now, he signed a 2-year, I believe, $11 million deal with like $6.2 million guaranteed. And wasn't really much of a buzz made about it when he signed there. Let me just give you a few things, though, that should give Jaguars fans some excitement. Now, over his career, he's averaging over 4.5 yards per carry. He's a guy that runs between the tackles. And when given opportunities, just to give you kind of a little snapshot of him, in 2024, he's 35 carries for 173 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. In 2025, when given more opportunity, 112 carries, 500 yards, 6 touchdowns. Now, I will tell you that, of course, it wasn't like the Washington Commanders offense was cooking with gas when they were running the football. However, in looking at Chris Rodriguez, I mean, he could definitely add to this Jaguars team. He's more of a between the tackles type guy. So that actually is, I believe, what the Jaguars want to do a little bit more. So Rodriguez can be very, very important in that aspect. And then you have Shaw Tootin, who can, hit the edges and line up in the slot and do all those different things that Travis Etienne did. So that's where I kind of think they're going in terms of things, more of a running back by committee type of thing, as opposed to a bell cow back that you got to depend on for everything. So, that's what Liam Cohen did when he was offensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers before he became the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So I take it that he's probably going to dig into that bag and continue to go there and continue to, basically give teams different looks every single game, which I think is something that can keep teams on their toes, as well as, definitely open up new opportunities for the offense, especially Trevor Lawrence, who's looking for that more consistent season this year. And I know he had a good season last year, but there's still those peaks and valleys that you get from him over the season as well. And, you're looking for that straight line consistency, not the ebbs and flows that he has from time to time on the field. Of course, speaking of Trevor Lawrence, and quarterbacks, there's some other quarterbacks in this division. One of those is Daniel Jones. He signed a new contract, 2 years, $88 million. Of course, with, some money guaranteed, of course, obviously. But, to give you the exact number, that's $50 million guaranteed. But there's another quarterback in the division and on that team that people are talking about, or some are talking about, and that's Anthony Richardson. Now, Anthony Richardson, when he came out of college, people marveled at his athletic ability. I mean, he could run fast as, some running backs and wide receivers. He was big as tight ends, and he had an arm that was unbelievable. I still remember him making a throw, fading backwards, throwing it almost 60 yards on the money for the Colts. But unfortunately, those times are few and far between for him. So, with that being said, of course, it's not looking like he's going to get playing time there because Daniel Jones is there, obviously. Um, Again, and they see him as the answer at their quarterback position, despite, the Achilles injury, things like that. The Colts gave him the okay, he being Anthony Richardson, the okay to seek a trade. Now, so far, nothing has happened. He is not going anywhere. But I do have a couple teams that would be interesting for him to be on. That first team, that would be the Los Angeles Rams. Now, I know the Los Angeles Rams have Matthew Stafford, and I know he's a guy that, every time it turns around, he looks like he's in pain, and then he comes up and plays a great season. Because remember last season, people were talking about his back, and he might not, where is he going to be during this season? And he played great and even had an MVP season. So he's back again to do it again, but you never know year to year what's going to happen. So, with no one with Anthony Richardson not being rushed to play, why not throw in there? Why not throw him out there in LA? You're not going to give up a high pick for him, and you could actually groom him and grow him and put him in that Sean McVay system, and allow him to learn and watch Matthew Stafford continue to grow as a quarterback. If that is to happen, then I mean, that would be a positive thing for Anthony Richardson. And if it doesn't work out, I mean, it just doesn't work out. And it isn't like you wasted a high pick to go get him. You wasted maybe a 7th round pick to go get him. I mean, that's going to be probably what it takes to get Anthony Richardson. But we'll see what happens, but that would be a good thing for me in my opinion, for Anthony Richardson to go to the Rams, maybe sit behind Matthew Stafford and learn the Sean McVay offense, which, I mean, with his arm, he could be electric in that. But, of course, it's a learning process and also, maturity and growth for him in his game as well. Another team would be the Green Bay Packers. Now, I know. People will tell me, well, Jordan Love, he's a young quarterback. I mean, he's not going anywhere. I understand that. But Jordan Love also gets injured. That's why we saw Malik Willis come in, play lights out a couple games, and now he's got a big contract with or a nicely paid contract with the Miami Dolphins. So in this situation, you go to a place where a head coach in Matt LaFleur, he nurtures quarterbacks. He nurtures quarterbacks and helps them grow because people remember, Malik Willis, some people were saying he wasn't an NFL quarterback at one point in time and were wondering if he'd even be in the league in 5 years. Now he's, like I mentioned, paid by the Miami Dolphins, showed some promise, showed some ability, and did a lot of good things for Green Bay when he got the opportunity. So why not Anthony Richardson with the tools that he has? He's bigger than Malik Willis. He's stronger than Malik Willis. He has aptitude to play the quarterback position as well. And, I mean, he can do a lot of great things. Of course, he under his tutelage, it would be great because, I mean, again, I mentioned Malik Willis when he was with the Tennessee Titans did not look like a quarterback that was going to be in the league past 5 years to a lot of people. And now he could potentially be a NFL starter. Well, he's going to be for Miami. So he's going to be for Miami. But, just in looking at where he came from to where he is now, I mean, it's a great accomplishment, great journey that he's had. So to me, I definitely think that would be a place to nurture Anthony Richardson's talent, continue to allow him to grow. And, who knows, he might be ready and might be able to mature like the guys like the Sam Darnold's, like the Baker Mayfields as well. I mean, who took a while, but now they're mainstays at their current employer right now at the quarterback position. So you never know what can happen. Definitely We'll see what happens when it comes to Anthony Richardson and what happens in the rest of his, or the next chapter, I should say, of his career, and when or if he gets traded. And of course, last but certainly not least, I do want to talk about the Texans, and mainly the Texans offense. Now, with the Texans offense, you looked at their offensive line going in the end of the season, it was rough. I mean, you had Andrews in there at center. You had Titus Howard, who's their best offensive lineman. You had Ursery, who was a rookie at tackle, one tackle. You just had pieces all over the place, but you just weren't sure or safe or thinking good about them. And then you couple with that the issues and the struggles that CJ Stroud had, and you had a mess offensively for the most part. Outside of a few different things happening or a few plays here and there. So this offseason, they went out and they added offensive linemen again. Now, I was definitely very, very concerned about them to start this offseason, wondering what were they going to do up front, what was going to go on with CJ Stroud, what are they going to do in the running game, all those different things I was wondering. Well, the first thing they did is traded for David Montgomery to add to their team. The second thing they started doing is stockpiling offensive linemen. Now, they've got a few offensive linemen they signed. They re-signed Ed Ingram at guard, 3 years, $37 million deal. Tackle Trent Brown, they brought him back. I think he's more of a mentor type, not necessarily a guy that's going to step in and play, but he may be a swing tackle and mentor type for Ursery at the tackle position. He'll still be there, right, by the way. Then they brought in a former Arizona Cardinal guard, Evan Brown, as well as Wyatt Teller. So quietly, they brought in some veterans and brought in some guys that are capable. I do like the additions more than what they did last offseason. They brought in, of course, people remember Cam Robinson. They brought him in, which he had actually been jettisoned from the Jaguars, who needed offensive linemen. They sent him to another team, which ended up in another team, which would be the Houston Texans. So definitely, that team was the Vikings, by the way. But definitely, it's going to be interesting to see how quickly this line can meld together and how quickly they can just make things happen, because the running game is going to be essential for them, especially if CJ Stroud does struggle again to start this season, which I know Texans fans are hoping he does not. But if he does, then you're going to need something to lean on. That running game is going to be something to lean on. All right. Now, of course, like I mentioned, last episode, I added the Touring the AFC South mailbag, and we're going to be at it again. It's another edition of the Touring the AFC South mailbag, and we're going to go, we're staying mostly on the East for this one, just to kind of give you a heads up there. But first question, we're staying in the South. We're going with this one. Do the Colts, it's from Paris from Memphis, Tennessee. Do the Colts have a backup plan if Daniel Jones isn't ready to start the season? Right now, we don't know what that backup plan is, but the only thing I can think of is Riley Leonard. Yeah, I know. It doesn't sound exciting or thrilling or anything of that nature, but the only thing I can think of is Riley Leonard at this point, and maybe another veteran quarterback there. But other than that, that's what they got. I'm not thinking they want to bring anybody else really in terms of top tier or anything of that nature. I did think at one point maybe they'd have a shot at Malik Willis to bring him there. But of course, that would be if the negotiations for Daniel Jones would have went off the tracks. But when they did the transition tag, you knew that they were going to sign Daniel Jones to a new deal. So it is what it is. But yeah, I think that's their plan so far. It'll be interesting to see how that plan works out, or if Daniel Jones is even ready for the season. If he isn't ready for the season, then boy, oh boy, that's another bag of questions right there to think about. All right. Next question I got is from Danny T in Connecticut. He says, is Daniel Montgomery a true every down back? After trading for him, is he that guy? Now, as far as David Montgomery, of course, for those that don't know, he was one half of the Sonic and Knuckles pairing in Detroit with Jahmyr Gibbs. That pairing kind of leaned more towards Jahmyr Gibbs last season, which is why he got traded to the Houston Texans. Now, with him added to the Houston Texans, I do think that he can be an every down back. He can catch the ball in the backfield. However, they do have a special talent named Woody Marks. Woody Marks he made his impression in college catching the football. So I do think that David Montgomery will be in there on the first 2 downs, and that Woody Marks will be in there on third downs, or maybe being there for a series, perhaps, depending upon the down and distance and the situation. But yeah, is he that guy? Yeah, he could definitely be that guy, but it depends on, of course, how they want to use him, which I think they'll use him on first and second downs. Third downs be more Woody Marks. And also, it depends on that offensive line. If they are able to block better this year than they did last year, because boy, oh boy, it was some scary hours up in there. That's all I can say. And the year before that, Joe Mixon, he was fighting for those yards. He got 1,000 yards, but he was fighting for every single one of them. So that's what I got to say there. Thank you, Danny, for the question. All right, we have a repeat person back. We got Galen from Little Rock, Arkansas. How does Cam Ward do in his second season? I think he does better in his second season. Can I see him? Can I give you a prediction on how many touchdown passes? I'm going to throw out there one. I'm going to throw 20 touchdown passes, at least 20 to 25 touchdown passes for Cam Ward this season. I do like the offense. I do like Brian Daboll being here with the Tennessee Titans to be his offensive coordinator. You added, another wide receiver, a safety blanket in Wandale Robinson. Your other wide receivers are a year older in terms of Chim DK and Alec Almanor, and you did keep Calvin Ridley. I know that wasn't the most popular choice among some Titans fans, but I do think he provides another weapon out there that teams have to look at. So with that being said, I do think, the second year with, more pieces around him, and just with the change in offense and Brian Daboll tutoring him and coaching him and grooming him to be what he can be, I definitely think he has roughly between 20 to 25 touchdowns, cuts down the interceptions, and he has a great year for the Tennessee Titans. All right, the next question I got here is from Ed H from Parts Unknown. At what point will we see a change in the free agent landscape where bargain deals between players and teams become more prevalent? Honestly, I'm not really for bargain deals between players and teams. The reason why I'm not for that is because the NFL means not for long. And in my opinion, you got to get what you can get. And, that's what your agents are for. Your agents are not for getting you bargain deals. They're for getting you the most money for your talent. And that's why I don't really see bargain deals coming back. Well, bargain deals could come back, of course, but them being prevalent, no. I don't ever see them coming back and being prevalent at any point in time again. That's just my thinking. They'll be around still, but they won't be prevalent as in all over the place. No, I don't see those happening at all. Thank you, Ed, for your question. All right, next question I have. Can Tennessee win the AFC South? Yes, they can win the AFC South. I will say that all 4 teams, you can state a case for them winning the AFC South. That's how good the AFC South could be going into the 2026 season. So, yes, can they win the AFC South? Yes, they can. Definitely got to have a lot of growth from last year, 3 wins to get to the playoffs or win the AFC South, but it's not entirely impossible for them to do. All right. Got 2 more questions here, or 3 more questions, I believe. Or is it 2 more questions? 2 more questions. All right. The next one's from Bill from New York City. What do you think? Yeah, New York City. Yeah, that one. Well, what do you think of the Colts? What do you see as the Colts' priorities in the NFL draft? Now, as far as the Colts, the priorities I see there, they're going to draft an offensive lineman at some point. They always do that to try to groom an offensive lineman. That's what I usually see from them. But other than that, I could see the linebacker position, them going to get someone there, maybe adding a young guy, even though they did sign a veteran from Arizona pretty recently. But I can see them going to get a younger linebacker. Definitely can see them adding another edge rusher as well. Those are the 2 things I could definitely see them doing. Maybe add to the safety position on this team. You can see that. And you can also never have enough corners if you're Lou Anarumo, who loves his corners. And also, another thing to look at, I did miss this one. wide receiver position, because you have Alec Pierce as your number one wide receiver. You traded away Michael Pittman Jr., you have Josh Downs, you have a couple other players, but you need an infusion of talent there. So I could see them drafting a wide receiver as well. But, I would say priorities, I would throw linebacker, edge, wide receiver, and maybe safety after that. That's what I would say. And my last question is from Jag Bull from Winter Park, Florida. How do you feel about former Florida Gator Ventrell Miller picking up where departed linebacker Devin Lloyd left off in Jacksonville? I don't feel any type of way. I mean, I would love to see it. I know Ventrell Miller had his moments in time, and you saw him on the field doing his thing. However, what I will say in regards to that is you got to see it more. You got to see it more consistently. And is he going to be the guy that starts at linebacker to replace Devin Lloyd? We will see if he is. I mean, you saw him replace Oluokun last year for a couple bits, and he did not do terrible at all. He actually played pretty well. However, it's different when you're replacing someone for a moment in time and when you're replacing someone permanent. So we'll see what happens when it comes to Jacksonville Jaguars and Ventrell Miller, and if he is the one to replace Devin Lloyd, how he does, and if he's consistent across the board with that starting nod, if it does happen for him. Thank you all for your questions. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Touring the AFC South, episode 382. Of course, my name is Mike Patton. I'm the host of the show. You can find me on the artist formerly known as Twitter at Mike Patton82. You can also find me in Blue Sky at Mike Patton82. You can find me on Instagram and Threads at that's THA and THE _general_MP. And you can find Touring the AFC South on all listening platforms, whether it be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, you name it, we are there. And you can also find Touring the AFC South on the Mike Patton Network, where you can subscribe, hit the bell so you don't miss any new episodes or content. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Touring the AFC South. We're out. Peace.